articulating all the thoughts, feelings, emotions, and actions that I witnessed during the next 6 seconds is difficult for me to express and keep in some semblance of order. Everything happened so fast. Bam! I heard the sound of a high-powered rifle being fired, coming from behind us, from over my right shoulder. What was that, a firecracker? S.A. Reddy asked. My mind was already racing, processing thoughts in milliseconds. Firecracker? Cherry bomb? M80? I didn't see any smoke. I don't think so, I replied, already knowing in my mind it wasn't a firecracker. It was a gunshot. Hello, welcome back to my channel. I'm Jessica Nell. And if you're new, then welcome. I would love to earn your subscription. I would also love to just tell you, we just finished The Palace Papers by Tina Brown, a book all about the British monarchy, and we have done other books on the channel. So if you are not familiar with my channel and you love a good read, then you'll want to check out the channel page where I have plenty of playlists of different books that we've done. Today, we are going to actually do a book by one of the Secret Service agents that was with Kennedy that day in Dallas, in Dealey Plaza, which I live in the Dallas area. That's why I point this direction sometimes when I talk about Dealey Plaza. But it's called The Final Witness. A Kennedy Secret Service agent breaks his silence after 60 years. This book was written and released in 2023, and it actually contained a critical piece of information that we're going to get into here. It's a piece of information that changed the way that researchers understand not just the Kennedy assassination, but actually one critical piece of evidence that had been wrongly understood for 60 years. And we're going to jump right into the event at Dealey Plaza. They are coming down in the motorcade, and he starts it this way. After we completed the turn, I could hardly believe what I saw. Thousands of people packed the sidewalks on both sides, and the crowd spilled out into the street. Main Street was 4 lanes wide and was so packed with people that there was barely a lane wide enough for the president's limo to get through. People were on fire escapes and rooftops, hanging out of windows, you name it. There were some people on top of a theater marquee. The sidewalks were solid. Anywhere there was a place to stand, someone was standing. They were all cheering at the top of their lungs and clapping too. The growling of the motorcycle escort engines added to the pitched decibel level. All this fuss over the Kennedys. I could not imagine what it would be like if this were an unfriendly environment. At one point, I remember an overeager teenage boy come out of the crowd. He had a camera in his hand and he was running towards the president's limo. S.A. Reddy, so that would be the Secret Service agent, Reddy was closest in line of sight, so I pointed the boy out. S.A. Reddy nodded, stepped off the running board, intercepted the boy, gave him a gentle nudge, and then jumped back onto the running board, barely missing a beat. Well done, I said, while feeling kind of sorry for the kid, who had tumbled back into the crowd. I hoped he was okay, but he should have known better. We had completed our pass through the heart of downtown Dallas and were now slowing down to make another turn, this time to the right, onto Houston Street. I want to point out to you, I'll put a map up here to the side, that this is the point at which their car would have faced Dealey Plaza and turned toward the 6th floor depository window. This whole next section is when, if there was someone in the 6th floor depository window and their only goal was to take a shot, they would do it right then, okay? One thing that doesn't make any sense to me about the 6th floor situation is that I'm standing right here on Houston Street. This is where Kennedy's route would have come, right down here, turn onto Houston, before ever making his way into Dealey Plaza. And you can see right here behind me, there is a direct line of sight that would have been for 5 to 10 seconds at least, I think longer. And he didn't take that shot, but then he takes a really complicated downhill shot when they went down into Elm Street. Just doesn't make sense to me. The crowd had thinned considerably, but I was still concentrating on the people along my side of the follow-up car, watching for signs of anything harmful. We slowed down even more as we approached another turn, this one to the left. This is the one that's a greater than 90-degree turn. I want you to watch this blue vehicle that's sitting here at the turn waiting to come on. Watch what they have to do to get onto this road, and I'll just show you. They are actually coming from a stopped position. Watch how slowly they have to make this turn. There's another one. We'll watch them. There they come, greater than 90 degrees as they come down and make their way down. I got a quick glance out of the corner of my eye of an orangish colored building that was going to be on my side of the road after we completed the turn, but I was too focused on what was immediately in front of me, so I didn't think twice about it. We slowed down even more and were barely moving at a snail's pace as SAs Greer and Kinney maneuvered the president's limo and our follow-up car around a sharp, almost complete hairpin turn to the left. That's all I saw of the brick building before some trees along the sidewalk obscured my view. The only thing visible through the trees was the building's ground floor facade, which appeared to be made of gray concrete blocks in some sort of crisscross pattern. I wonder if these are details he added after the fact, or if he actually was so detail focused in that moment that those things stood out to him and he's giving us his actual recollection. Because of course, this book was written in 2023. There were even fewer people along the sidewalk here, so at this point I started to scan ahead. We were approaching an open and sloping grassy area that was on my side of the road. I made a quick scan ahead toward the slope, and seeing nothing out of the ordinary, I continued scanning to my left toward the front of the cars. The lead car and the president's car had already straightened out from making their turn, and halfback was just lining up behind them. The three vehicles were heading down a slight decline toward an underpass. That's the famous triple underpass. S.A. Lawson radioed ahead to the Trade Mart to give them our 5-minute arrival alert. We had 2 miles to go. I want to point out at this point, the Trade Mart was where they were headed, and it's one of the reasons why there actually wasn't much journalistic presence at the Motorcade, because a cadre of reporters were waiting for the president there at the Trade Mart. In fact, one of my favorite researchers, Penn Jones Jr., who was in the Dallas area and continued to follow up about assassination investigations for decades after the fact, he was at the Trade Mart. So many media personalities were there at that place, and they radioed ahead, and everybody's expecting them there in just a few minutes. It's just up the highway from where they were at this point. As a note to the reader, articulating all the thoughts, feelings, emotions, and actions that I witnessed during the next 6 seconds is difficult for me to express and keep in some semblance of order. Everything happened so fast. Bam! I heard the sound of a high-powered rifle being fired, coming from behind us, from over my right shoulder. What was that, a firecracker? S.A. Reddy asked. My mind was already racing, processing thoughts in milliseconds. Firecracker? Cherry bomb? M80? I didn't see any smoke. I don't think so, I replied, already knowing in my mind it wasn't a firecracker. It was a gunshot, and one coming from a high-powered rifle. I recognized it immediately from having grown up with guns and fired many. This was definitely the sound of a high-powered rifle. Ironically, only the day before I had been talking with that Houston detective about hunting. Today was supposed to be the first day of deer season, so thoughts of a rifle shot immediately flashed through my mind. When the first gunshot was fired, I was looking toward the front of the motorcade. I had just completed my scan from the building we had passed, scanning from right to left over the grassy area that I had seen only seconds earlier, and I was now scanning up over the top of an underpass that was directly ahead of us. I had just started to scan back to my right, and my eyes were passing over the president's limo as the shot rang out. I immediately turned, looking over my right shoulder toward the direction of the sound. I want to point out, as you're going down, the buildings that are behind you are the Texas School Book Depository back and to the right, and the Daltex building, which is often identified as another potential location for the shooting to have come from. By researchers, I mean, not obviously by the official narrative. I saw nothing. There were no obvious signs of a disturbance. Besides, we were moving and there was no time to dwell on one particular area. I quickly looked at the limo and saw President Kennedy leaning to the left and raising his arms. I thought he was turning around to see where the noise came from. At the time, I did not realize that he had already been hit by a bullet. I turned my head to look back toward the area where the sound had come from. I was searching for some sign of danger, a disturbance, a clue, anything that would help me find the source of the sound. All I saw were people running, scattering, and diving to the ground. I made another quick glance at the building that we had passed and still did not pick up on anything unusual. I was scanning fast. We were moving, and I was trying to cover as much of the area as possible. I looked again back to my left, hoping to find something that I might previously have missed. I knew we were under attack by someone somewhere in the vicinity. The seconds were ticking away, and I couldn't spot anything. My eyes returned to the front, and I saw Clint sprinting toward the president's limo. He was doing what every Secret Service agent was trained to do. He must have jumped from his position on halfback's left front running board the split second after the first shot, because he was already in full stride, speeding toward SS-100X, racing in his leather-soled dress shoes, suit, and tie. He was the only agent who had half a chance of reaching the limo. God forbid he should trip and fall. If that happened, I knew we would run over him. We wouldn't stop and couldn't stop no matter what. Go, Clint, go, buddy, go, I was thinking, urging him on under my breath. You get a sense of what he's talking about these 6 seconds being so full, because we've now read several pages of the description of all the things that were happening during this 6 seconds. So his eyes are scanning. He's taking in barely the information. The president is turning. He's looking at the crowd. He's checking behind him. He's back to the left. He's seeing Clint. It's all happening so fast. I knew there was no way I could make it from where I stood on the right rear running board of halfback. I had a bad angle and we were moving too fast. SA was ready in front of me. He had jumped off the running board, but ATSAIC Roberts had called him back for the same reason. There was no way he could make it either. I had this useless and helpless feeling. I was stuck into a position where I couldn't respond or do anything. I was continuing my scan across the underpass that we were approaching. Clint was running, his arms outstretched, reaching for the leftmost grab bar on the trunk of the SS-100X. The grab bars were there for Secret Service agents to hold on to while standing on the steps of the back of the limo whenever they weren't jogging or running along beside it during a motorcade such as ours. However, on November 22nd, 1963, there were no agents on the back of the limo because President Kennedy did not want them there. The president did not want anyone blocking him from the public's view. This all came about at the president's request less than a week earlier during a motorcade in Tampa, Florida. All of us knew that it was an added security risk, but if that's what the president wanted, we all acceded. We really had no choice. Just as Clint's fingertips touched the grab bar, he stumbled, but he managed to keep his balance and was able to grab hold of the bar and hang on at the same moment that S.A. Bill Greer hit the accelerator. At this point, I thought that Lady Luck was on our side. I don't know if anyone other than the passengers inside the president's limo even realized that the president had already been hit. I certainly didn't. I just knew that we had to get out of there fast. Clint was now starting to pull himself up onto the trunk of SS-100X, and we began to accelerate when, bam, a second shot rang out. The second shot also came from behind, but it sounded louder than the first one. It also had a different feeling, a different reverberation. It was still the sound of a high-powered rifle, but it was definitely different from the first. Maybe it was because of our location. We were now closer to the underpass and not in the open as much. That's interesting. All I was thinking was faster, 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 as I dismissed the thought of an echo from the first shot because the time delay was too long. All of these thoughts were flashing through my mind. We couldn't get out of the area fast enough. I was looking forward and had a clear view of the president's limo in front of us. It was probably no more than 50 feet from my position on the right rear running board of halfback to the back of the rear right seat in the president's limo. From where I was, I saw no disturbance in the limo. Everything still looked the same. President Kennedy was still seated fairly upright, leaning against Mrs. Kennedy with his head tilted slightly back. Mrs. Kennedy had her arms around his shoulders, and Clint was almost on top of the limo's trunk. I thought that the shot had missed. In my mind, I was still trying to dismiss the reality of what was actually happening, even though I knew better. I even tried to look at the tires on the limo, looking for signs of a blowout. I knew there wasn't one, but I looked anyway. I also had this strange sensation that is difficult for me to explain. As I recall these events, it's like I am removed from the scene, yet still in it. Like I'm watching myself as everything unfolds in front of me. We had only traveled a short distance over a short period of time, but everything seemed like it was happening in slow motion, taking forever. All thoughts of reaching safety vanished in the next moment when Lady Luck skipped the scene. A third shot rang out, and the assassin's bullet found its mark. I saw a flash of white as the right side of the President Kennedy's head exploded in a pink spray of blood, flesh, and brain matter. I automatically ducked, not wanting to get splattered as we drove through it. The president slumped to his left and out of sight. Clint had managed to pull himself up and was now on top of the trunk just as Mrs. Kennedy started to crawl out over the back, as if reaching for something. Clint managed to push her back down into the rear seat and straddled the seat, covering her and the president with his body. I mean, what a heroic thing, and I want to honor Agent Clint Hill. He just passed last month, and what a hero. What a hero. You know, I recently listened to a story of 9/11, and one of the people recounting the day was talking about running down the stairs as firefighters are running up. And we all recognize the beautiful bravery of people who run toward the danger in order to protect others. It's a remarkable trait, and I just want to pause to honor Clint Hill, because what a legacy, what an instinct to go and move toward danger in order to protect others. It's so beautiful. Everything that happened from the first shot fired up to now had only taken a matter of 5 or 6 seconds, and we were now zooming through an underpass at a high rate of speed. The last thing I remember seeing before passing through the underpass is one of our motorcycle escorts stopping by the curbside, where the grassy area came down to meet the sidewalk and the street. A black man dressed in green slacks and a tan shirt was running up the grassy slope toward a cement structure. There was a flash of darkness and roaring sounds, then daylight as we emerged on the other side of the underpass. S.A. Reddy and I were still standing on the running board when ATSAIC Roberts asked if anyone got the exact time of the shooting. I was wondering who in the hell had the presence of mind to check their watch under the circumstances, when someone else replied, 12:30 p.m. Then someone told me to get inside the car, and S.A. Bennett pulled me by the arm. My sunglasses fell off in the process, and S.A. Bennett quickly picked them up and handed them back. Then I held on to S.A. Reddy's arm as he climbed over the door and into the back seat. This is a small detail, but it illustrates how clear some of the events of that fateful day remain in my mind, even today, nearly 60 years later. That his sunglasses fell off, and he's holding onto an arm as people are climbing. Vivid details that do stand out to you in a moment like that, like where your mind was, what was happening near you. We were now speeding along on an expressway, and I noticed a small-sized family group standing by an intersection waving to us. As we flew by, I remember thinking, poor them, they have no idea what has just happened or where we are headed or why we are driving by so quickly. I had no idea where we were going either. We were no longer on the designated Motorcade route. I only assumed that we were headed to the nearest hospital. Not that we needed to rush. I saw the third shot hit President Kennedy in the head, and I saw the results of the wound. There was no way that President Kennedy could survive a hit like that and still be alive. No way. The massive head wound that he had received just blew his head wide open. Clint confirmed my thoughts when he looked back toward Halfback, lying on top of the trunk, and shook his head from side to side, giving us a thumbs down signal. I had drawn my revolver at some point after being pulled back into Halfback, but I don't remember doing it. And I saw that S.A. Bennett had his revolver out too. I realized that it was both ridiculous and useless, so I reholstered mine. We were now traveling at a high rate of speed, and I turned to look back to the rear. I wanted to see what was happening behind us because Vice President Johnson and Lady Bird had been in the car following Halfback throughout the motorcade. They were still behind us, but we had put quite a distance between the two cars. ATSAC Roberts had started giving general instructions to his detail agents to cover Vice President Johnson as soon as we stopped. We started to slow down, and I turned back to look to the front to see what was happening. The brake lights on the president's limo were on, and we were slowing down to make a right-hand turn. After making the turn, we headed towards some buildings, which I assumed belonged to the closest hospital. The next chapter headline is called Parkland. Here is where we're going to get the significant detail that changes our understanding of the timing and placement of a critical piece of evidence. The presidential limo and Secret Service car follow-up came to an abrupt stop. It was 12:38 p.m. Central Standard Time. The forward momentum of the stop was so great that it knocked me off balance. I was glad that I had been holding onto the grab bar in front of me. Otherwise, I might have ended up in the front seat. We were at the emergency entrance to Parkland Memorial Hospital. The two cars had come to a stop, one behind the other, next to a covered walkway leading into the entryway. The walkway was already lined with people, some dressed in medical garb and others dressed in civilian clothes. It had only been 5 minutes or so since leaving Dealey Plaza, and already people were waiting on us. Until a few moments ago, I had been living my dream, but now my dream had turned into a living nightmare. The two cars had barely stopped when S.A. Reddy opened the right rear door of the follow-up car and was out in a flash. He went to his left where Kellerman and Roberts had both disembarked and were talking. I immediately jumped out behind him. If I headed to my left toward the president's car, I knew I'd be caught in a jam of people, so I decided that it would be faster to turn right and go around the rear of the follow-up car to get to the First Lady. I heard Roberts and Kellerman discussing assignments. It was now imperative to protect Vice President Johnson, even though he had his own security team. Roberts was sending Reddy and the rest of his shift to cover Vice President and Mrs. Johnson. I knew these instructions did not include me. My place was with the First Lady. Without hesitation, I continued to run around the car, the rear of the follow-up car, and raced to the president's limo. Clint had already slid off the trunk of SS-100X and had gone around to the right side of the limo to assist with the removal of President Kennedy's body. When I reached the car, Mrs. Kennedy was seated sideways with her back toward me and the left rear door. She was holding what was left of the president's head in her lap, bending over, trying to cover it. I reached over the side of the closed door, took her gently by the shoulders in an attempt to help her. I said, "Come on, Mrs. Kennedy, let me help you." She wouldn't budge. I couldn't see her face, but I heard her say firmly, "No, I want to stay with him." I let go. Realizing that I needed to do something different to get the First Lady to safety, I grabbed the door handle and yanked the door open. Just then, Clint arrived and took over. He had come around from behind me and stepped inside the large backseat area ahead of me, past Mrs. Kennedy, closer to the president's body. The situation was fluid. Others were trying to remove the body. I stepped into the limo behind Clint. I was scanning everything in sight. The first thing I noticed was a small splintered crack in the front windshield. It was located to the left of the rear view mirror on the driver's side. I immediately assumed that it had been made by a ricocheting bullet fragment. How on earth could a bullet fragment have flown up there without hitting someone? I wondered. Looking up, I saw S.A. Lawson. He was running along the walkway, coming toward us, pushing a gurney. He was followed by another person dressed in hospital garb who was also pushing a gurney. 2 gurneys? Why 2 gurneys? My thoughts were cut short. I looked at Governor Connolly. Seated directly in front of the president, he was slumped to the side. He must have turned at some point. His white shirt had bright red blood stains. Good God, had he been hit too, or was he just splattered with the president's blood? I then realized that he had also been shot, probably by the second bullet, and his body was blocking the right rear door of the limo. S.A. Lawson arrived with his gurney, and other agents quickly started to move Governor Connolly onto it. Once that task was completed, Mrs. Connolly stood up and exited the limo, following the governor's gurney as they raced toward the emergency entrance. With Governor Connolly out of the way, the pathway was clear enough for agents to get to the president. While all of this was happening, Mrs. Kennedy continued to cradle her husband's head. The president's body wasn't going anywhere until Mrs. Kennedy released him. Clint kept urging her to let go while I scanned the inside of the car and the surrounding outside area. The entire scene was crazy and awful. I want to remind you, we're about to get a description of the car. We don't have many existing photographs or insights into what this car looked like. It was cleaned up really fast, and evidence was not presented of how it was found. So let's listen to what he has to say. The entire scene was crazy and awful. Pieces of pink flesh, gray brain matter, and blood were splattered everywhere. They clung to the back seats and all over the right rear door panel. It was a mess, an ugly, bloody mess. Continuing my surveillance, I looked back toward the follow-up car. It was now empty, and there were no agents in sight. I returned my attention to the presidential limo. Looking down at the seat beside Mrs. Kennedy, I saw 2 brass bullet fragments sitting in a pool of bright red blood. I could hardly believe it. They glistened like 2 gold nuggets in their blood-red surroundings. I bent over it, picked up the largest of the 2 pieces, and examined it. It was about the size of the end of my little finger. It looked like a small mushroom that had been squashed. I quickly replaced it exactly where I had found it. About then, even though only seconds had passed, Clint finally convinced Mrs. Kennedy to let go of the president's head. When she released it, someone said, "Cover up his head." Thinking quickly and without hesitating, Clint removed his suit coat and covered the president's head and upper torso. None of us wanted anyone to see the president in this condition. Then Clint, Kellerman, Lawson were able to finally remove the president's lifeless body from the backseat area of the limo and place it onto the gurney. Dave Powers, the president's special assistant and longtime friend, was leaning over the president as they removed his body and kept repeating over and over, "Oh no, Mr. President, Mr. President, oh no." When Mrs. Kennedy finally stood up, I looked again at the seat and saw a bullet on top of the tufted black leather cushioning behind where she had been sitting. It was resting in a seam where the tufted leather padding ended against the car's metal body. So up on the top of the tufted black leather cushioning behind where she had been sitting. It wasn't a bullet fragment like the other 2 pieces. It was a completely intact bullet. It had been hidden behind Mrs. Kennedy all the time she was seated. No wonder I hadn't seen it sooner. I picked it up and quickly examined it. It was approximately 2 inches long and in almost perfect condition. It was not distorted in any way and had rifle striations running lengthwise along the sides. Man, oh man, oh man, I thought, what should I do? Seconds were ticking away, things were moving fast, and I had to make a quick decision. All sorts of thoughts and what-ifs were running through my mind. 3 shots, bullet fragments, and now a completely intact bullet. He writes, this was, in all caps, important evidence. My mind was spinning, processing thoughts and information while I continued to scan the area looking for other special agents. The vice president's limo had yet to arrive, so there were no agents from his detail in sight. In fact, there were no other agents in sight anywhere to the rear, to my right, or to the front. Where are they? Where the hell is Greer? He was driving the president's limo. He should be here. The follow-up car was empty too. Where is Kenny? He was driving it. Oh man, where the hell is everyone? Where did all the agents go? Who is going to secure the car, all caps, and the crime scene? Everyone seemed to be crowded around the president's body. No one was paying attention to anything else. My immediate concern was the bullet. It would be visible to anyone happening to walk by. What about photographers? Or worse yet, what about a souvenir hunter? Thoughts continued to race through my mind. People were starting to mill around and beginning to merge toward the car. I had to do something, and I had to do it fast. I was afraid this nearly perfect, intact bullet, and they give the photo of Exhibit 399, the bullet Special Agent Paul Landis found in the limousine, Dallas, Texas, November 22nd, 1963. I was afraid this nearly perfect intact bullet would disappear. I did not want that to happen. Clint was occupied helping Mrs. Kennedy out of the limo. She was already halfway out of the car, and I had to stay with Clint and her. Damn it, Paul. Decision time. All this time I had been holding the bullet in my hand. But instead of reaching down and replacing the bullet where I had found it, like I had done with the bullet fragments, I slipped it into my right suit coat pocket. All of this had taken place in a fraction of seconds. I would give the bullet to Kellerman, I thought, and explain my actions later when there was time. Everything was happening so quickly, and as I rushed to keep up with Clint and Mrs. Kennedy, I noticed Mrs. Kennedy had left her clutch purse and her pink Oleg Cassini pillbox hat on the back seat. Obviously, these items were the last things on her mind, so I picked up both of them to take with us. There was also a Zippo cigarette lighter lying on the seat. It had a shiny chrome finish that was now stained with the president's blood. It was resting against the back seat cushion, so I picked it up too. I turned it over in my hand and saw the presidential seal on the opposite side. Knowing that Mrs. Kennedy had an occasional smoke, I assumed that the lighter had slipped out of her purse. Well, Mrs. Kennedy doesn't need to see this reminder, I thought, and I slipped the lighter into the same pocket that held the bullet. I would give the lighter to her personal assistant once we returned to the White House. Author's note, it was almost 50 years later when I learned from Clint that the Zippo was actually his lighter and that it must have slipped out of his suit jacket when he covered the president's head. Duh, I thought. I should have known. He also told me that the personal assistant has since sold the lighter on eBay. The bouquet of roses that had been presented to Mrs. Kennedy upon her arrival at Love Field also lay in disarray on the back seat. They can stay, I thought. Today, black and white photos of the flowers exist that were taken at the time, but they are staged photos. In them, the bouquet is intact. That wasn't the case when I last saw them as we were leaving the limo. The bouquet was scattered when we arrived at Parkland. I have learned from researchers who have commented on my videos that actually the staged photo was the one of the vice presidential limo. It's not the same bouquet. Stepping out of the limo with purse and hat in hand, the bullet and lighter secure in my suit coat pocket, I followed Mrs. Kennedy. I moved to her left side and everyone headed towards the emergency room entrance. Mrs. Kennedy was now on my right, next to the gurney that was carrying the lifeless body of her husband. So I just want to point out to you that for many pages now, he has referred to the body of the president, the body, the lifeless body. They lifted his lifeless body. So we are all told, of course, that the president didn't pass until later after the blood pumping and the, attempts at rescue had been done. He's indicating his belief that death had already occurred. Only minutes had passed since the shooting. The cortege of people consisting of Secret Service agent, hospital staff, and I don't know who else burst through the emergency entrance doors like a runaway train. I mean, we were really flying. The entrance lobby was utter confusion, created mostly by the way we blasted through the entrance, and probably by Governor Connolly's entrance prior to ours. People were scattering everywhere to get out of our way, most of them hospital staff who were rushing in to see what all the commotion was about. I think it was sometime immediately after our entrance that I handed Mrs. Kennedy her purse and hat, but I don't recall exactly because of all the chaos and confusion. It was really hectic, and I was running and yelling, "Out of the way! Get out of the way!" I spotted a group of gawkers who were ahead of us, standing in what appeared to be a hallway entrance. A nurse was now running along beside me, and I grabbed a corner of her uniform sleeve to get her attention, and I asked her to please disperse the small group and help us clear the area. A flurry of blue, green, and white faceless hospital uniforms moved. A pathway cleared, and we were able to get through. I had no idea where we were headed, but by God, I did know that the way we were moving, nothing was going to get in our way to stop us. I just followed the gurney and made sure I stayed close to Mrs. Kennedy. We angled to the right as we crossed through the entrance lobby and headed down a short corridor to a doorway on the left with the number 1 on it. The doorway was on the left side of the corridor, so in order to pass through, the gurney had to be pivoted 90 degrees. Even then, it was a tight fit, with no room to spare along the sides for people to get through. Once the gurney was turned, everyone in our initial group, plus those extras who had joined us, tried to jam their way through the doorway all at once. Mrs. Kennedy had to drop back behind the gurney in order to enter the room, and I stepped up behind her to prevent her from being jostled by the now rude and unruly collection of people. Once she was inside the room, Mrs. Kennedy stepped to her left and stood behind the entrance door while people continued to push and shove their way past her. As I entered, or more to the point, was pushed into the trauma room. The president's lifeless body was already being lifted off the gurney and placed onto a white cotton blanket that covered the surface of a stainless steel examination table in the middle of the room. All sorts of medical apparatuses were at the end of the table where they had placed the president's head. The gurney, which had carried the president's body into the room, was then pushed aside and up against a beige tile wall by the doorway inside the room, partially blocking the doorway. I'm guessing the trauma room was maybe 20 feet by 20 feet. The gurney, located where it was, took up precious space inside the room. It also made it more difficult for people to enter or exit. Only no one was exiting. People continued pushing, shoving, and shouting, trying to get into a space that was already cramped. What is wrong with all these people? I wondered. Have they no respect? By now, I had been pushed up against the examination table and was tightly wedged against it, trapped right next to the president's feet. I turned my head to check on Mrs. Kennedy. She was still standing safely behind the doorway, having avoided all the pushing and shoving, but her face was expressionless. She appeared to be removed, unaware of the chaos happening in front of her. At least she wasn't trapped and being jostled by the rude crowd. I was relieved to see that she was safe in that respect. I glanced around looking for Clint, but did not see him. We were all packed together in the room, shoulder to shoulder, like sardines in a can, everyone focused on the president's head, which doctors were already examining. It seemed like everyone in the room was craning their necks, trying to see the president's head wound. Not me. I had seen enough outside when we were in the limo. I knew that if I looked now, I would probably pass out. Even the thought of it made me feel faint. I had to look down or away. I didn't dare pass out. What kind of person or agent would I be if I allowed that to happen? I had to hang in there no matter what. I was feeling claustrophobic. Where the hell was Clint anyway? In order to keep from passing out or fainting, I focused on the president's shoes. His feet were right by my side as he lay on the examination table. His shoes were black, and I wondered what brand, style, and size he wore. From the way the president's body had been placed, his left pant leg was pulled up above his black socks, and I even thought of reaching over to pull the pant leg down to cover the skin that was showing. All these mundane thoughts were going through my mind while people continued to push and shove. Just then another person was trying to push his way into the room, loudly announcing, I'm a doctor, please, please let me get through, I just need to get through. More pushing and shoving ensued as people tried to make room, but there was no place to go. What is wrong with these people? Then the doctor, who was already at the head of the examination table, called out, please, please, everyone, please, we need room to work. Everything was happening so rapidly that there was hardly any time to think. Only seconds had passed, and I was fumbling with the bullet in my pocket while I was concentrating on the president's shoes. For whatever reason, my thoughts shifted. This is where the bullet belongs, with the president's body. This bullet is important evidence. A doctor will find it, and it might be helpful during the autopsy. People were starting to leave the room. I had to make another split-second decision. Just do it, Paul. Just do it. If you're going to do anything, you've got to do it now before the opportunity slips away. I removed the bullet from my pocket, and reaching out over the examination table, I carefully placed it on the white cotton blanket next to the president's left shoe. When I let go, the bullet started rolling toward the edge of the table. Holy shit, I thought, as my heart jumped and started racing. I quickly reached back and stopped it from rolling just before it fell into a little trough that ran around the edge of the table. If it had fallen into that trough, or worse yet, onto the floor, I knew that I would not have had the time or ability to retrieve it. When the president's body had been placed on the examination table, it had made a small wrinkle in the cotton blanket by the president's feet. Because of this, I was able to reposition the bullet to prevent it from rolling again. With all the confusion going on in the room, no one had even noticed what I had done. Phew, that was close, I thought. The last thing I wanted was for that bullet to get lost. I felt relief. I was certain at the time that I had made the correct decision. I had saved an important piece of evidence, and I had placed it where it belonged, with the president's body. It would be found and prove to be helpful. I felt like a heavy burden had been lifted from my shoulders. So that's the end of our reading for today, and it's by Paul Landis, the Kennedy Secret Service agent, breaking his silence after 60 years. The book is called The Final Witness. So you'll want to get a copy to read the whole account. He tells obviously more than just this critical section, but this is the part that we wanted to focus on today. So then we're left with the question, what do we do with this information? How do we process this new piece of information about the magic bullet? He identifies the magic bullet as the one that he moved. He also indicated, which was a little hard for people at the time to believe, that he had no idea that there was any controversy about the magic bullet. But just to catch us all up, the magic bullet theory was something that came up during the Warren Commission, but prior to that, the speculation about the actual physical bullet was complicated because it had been found on a stretcher. And so some people had actually believed that it was found, that it was the second bullet, that it had gone through Kennedy, through Connolly, landed in his leg, and gotten lodged there. And that somehow the compressions or something had wiggled it out of his body. There was just speculation about where did it come from? Did it come through his body? You know, what is the origin of the bullet? And then Arlen Specter, who was on the Warren Commission, is the one who came up with the idea that it passed clear through Kennedy, through Connolly's back, through Connolly's wrist, and lodged in his thigh. And of course, we've all seen, hopefully if you haven't seen, go look it up, the little Seinfeld joke about a spit loogie or something, and the trajectory of the spit. They do a whole spoof on this magic bullet. But we all have had our thoughts about the magic bullet. But whatever you think about the number of shots, whether it was 3, whether it was as many as 8 or 10, whether they all came from one direction or whether there was potentially a trifecta of locations that bullets were coming from, or at least back there and the grassy knoll to the front. Whatever you believe about any of that evidence, we all have to contemplate. This is a firsthand account from somebody who was right next to Mrs. Kennedy throughout many parts of her public life, and who was right there in the moment on that day. And he is the one telling us, I watched all of these things, these were my responsibilities, and this is what I did. We have no reason to disbelieve him. He did say that basically he missed all of the controversy because he wasn't asked specifically about the bullet. He felt like he had done his duty. So he kind of didn't pay attention to the outcome of the bullet because his duties were different from that. He was asked questions about his positioning and what he had done in the motorcade and that kind of thing. And then that he had retreated into private life for decades, and basically because of what he later believed to be like a PTSD type response, he didn't want to go back and relive those days. And so he wasn't just recounting and trying to write books and trying to get on shows. He really retreated into his private life, and that's why when he learned not that long ago, a few years ago, that there was any discrepancy about this thing, he said, well, I have to tell my story. And he did. So then all of us are left with the chain of evidence questions of, number one, he fiddled with the fragments in the seat. Then he picks up this one. It's right here in the seat behind Mrs. Kennedy. So it couldn't have been the one that went through Kennedy, went through Connolly, lodged in his leg, whatever. It's here. And so he picks it up, fingers it for a minute, sticks it in his pocket. Later, he says he's fiddling with it, and that's when he remembers. He takes it, he sets it here, it starts to roll. He grabs it, puts it back, finds a fold in the blanket, sets it there, and that's the last time he thinks about it. That's the magic bullet. we've been told the things about it being the one that was found on Governor Connolly's, but he says he put it on a gurney, which is the exact position that it was found in. So it's just been a mistaken set of understanding to think that it could have ever been the one in Connolly because it was on Kennedy's stretcher. So then all of us are left with the question of, what now will you do with this evidence? I'm not making an advocacy here for some sort of, so then there's this other big plot that I'm pointing to. My real point is there are questions even about the central piece of evidence that we have been presented with. And this comes from a credible source. It's someone who was right there that day who's telling us, not like I picked it up and I handed it off and I'm not sure, and so therefore it could have done any. He's telling us what he did with it. He is taking responsibility and accountability for where it ended up, and it changes our understanding of the nature and the meaning of that evidence. So I would love to hear in the comments what you do with that, what your brain does with that, and where it leaves you in regard to the potential not only for the evidence to have different interpretations than we thought, but also whether or not it makes you more open to believe that there were more shots, more shooters, more things going on than the Warren Commission's outcome expresses. Next time, I believe we'll be starting our readings from Jean Hill. Her book is called JFK, The Last Dissenting Witness. And we will do a few readings from this book, at least a few, because there's a foreword by Oliver Stone, who has been testifying before Congress now. Mrs. Hill lived in the Dallas area, and I happened to have gotten a signed copy of her book. So next time we will be reading some selections from this book, and we will continue on with others after that point. I hope you'll come back for those. Thank you for making it with me through this reading. If you've made it all the way through and you're still interested, I would love to have your subscription and have you join us in the comments section. The comments section is where we do our, conversing about the topic, but also if you have links, books you want to recommend, other observations, share them in the comments. We will look forward to that. I hope you have a great day. Bye.